Grant Fletcher was 3 days away from losing everything when he made a choice that would change his life forever. The single father of 2 had no idea that saving a stranger's life would lead to the biggest decision he'd ever face. Grant worked as a security guard at Crescent Mall, barely making enough to keep his family afloat. During a quiet Tuesday shift, he spotted an elegant woman struggling to breathe near the fountain. His EMT training kicked in, and he helped her use her inhaler until she could breathe again. She thanked him and walked away, and he thought that was the end of it. Days later, a luxury car pulled up to his apartment. The woman he'd saved was Evelyn Cross, a billionaire who owned half the mall. She wanted to offer him a job running her charity foundation, complete with health care and college money for his daughters. But will his pride let him accept help when his family needs it most? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The eviction notice sat on Grant Fletcher's kitchen table like a judgment, its stark white letterhead contrasting against the worn wood surface that had seen better days. 30 days. That's all the time he had left before the landlord would change the locks and force him and his daughters onto the street. Grant stared at the document, his calloused fingers tracing the edges of the paper, as if somehow the words might change if he touched them enough times. "Dad, you're burning the eggs again." Emma's voice cut through his morning fog, and Grant looked up to see his 16-year-old daughter standing by the stove, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had her mother's eyes warm brown, with flecks of gold, and sometimes, when she looked at him with that mixture of concern and exasperation, it was like Sarah was standing there again. "Sorry, sweetheart." Grant moved to the stove, scraping the blackened eggs onto a plate. "Guess my mind was somewhere else." "The notice?" Emma asked quietly, nodding toward the table. She'd seen it when she came down for breakfast, and Grant cursed himself for not hiding it better. His daughters didn't need to carry the weight of his failures. "It's nothing I can't handle," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. "Just a paperwork mix-up." Emma gave him a look that said she wasn't buying it, but she didn't push. That was Emma, old beyond her years, carrying responsibility like a backpack she couldn't set down. It wasn't fair. At 16, she should be worried about homework and boys, and what dress to wear to prom, not whether her father could keep a roof over their heads. "Sophie's still sleeping," Emma said, pulling milk from the refrigerator. "Her cough kept her up again last night." Grant's jaw tightened. Sophie's chronic bronchitis had been acting up for weeks, and the inhaler the free clinic had given her wasn't helping much. She needed to see a specialist, needed proper medication, but Grant's insurance through the mall barely covered basic emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd trained as an EMT 20 years ago, knew enough to help strangers in crisis, but couldn't afford to help his own daughter breathe easier. "I'll check on her before I leave for work," Grant said, dividing the salvaged eggs between 2 plates. "Maybe we can get her in to see Dr. Martinez this week." Emma's expression softened. "Dad, you know we can't afford." "I'll figure it out." The words came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Emma flinch. Grant immediately regretted his tone. "I'm sorry, Em. I didn't mean to snap. It's just—" "I know." Emma touched his arm gently. "But maybe it's time to consider other options." Grant knew what she meant. Emma had been dropping hints for months about the scholarship applications sitting on her desk, the ones she hadn't submitted, because they required a parental financial statement that would reveal just how little they had. She'd been accepted to 3 colleges already, but the financial aid packages weren't enough. Without additional help, her dreams of studying environmental science would remain just that, dreams. The apartment around them told the story of their gradual decline. The furniture was a mismatched collection of second-hand finds and hand-me-downs. The carpet was worn thin in places, and the kitchen faucet had a persistent drip that Grant kept meaning to fix, but never found the time. It wasn't squalid, but it was tired. Everything about their life felt tired. Grant had moved them here 5 years ago, after Sarah's death. The medical bills from her cancer treatment had consumed their savings, their home, their stability. He thought he was being practical, finding an affordable place where they could rebuild. Instead, he'd found himself trapped in a cycle of barely making ends meet, watching his daughters grow up in circumstances far removed from what he'd once imagined for them. He'd taken the security job at Crescent Mall because it was what was available, and because the overnight shifts meant he could be home when the girls got out of school. But the pay was barely above minimum wage, and even working every overtime shift available, he couldn't get ahead. The mall itself was a monument to better times, once the bustling heart of their Midwest town, now a half-empty shell with too many vacant storefronts and too few customers. Grant's EMT certification gathered dust in a drawer. He'd earned it through night classes while Sarah was pregnant with Emma, thinking it might be a stepping stone to better opportunities. But life had other plans. Sarah's pregnancy complications, then Emma's early years, then Sophie's arrival, then Sarah's diagnosis. There was never time to pursue the career he'd trained for. The certificate had expired years ago, though the knowledge remained. "I should get ready for work," Grant said, rinsing his plate in the sink. The morning shift supervisor would be expecting him at 8, and Grant prided himself on never being late. It was a small thing, but it mattered. In a world where he felt like he was failing at everything else, at least he could be reliable. Emma was already dressed for school, her backpack sitting by the door. She'd been taking the bus since her freshman year because Grant's schedule didn't allow for the luxury of driving her. Another small failure to add to his growing list. "Dad?" Emma's voice was tentative. "There's something I need to tell you." Grant paused, hearing something in her tone that made his stomach clench. "What is it?" "I got a call yesterday from the scholarship committee at State University. They want to interview me for the full-ride scholarship." Emma's words came out in a rush. "It's next Friday. I know it's short notice, and I know we can't afford for me to miss work at the grocery store, but—" "Emma," Grant turned to face her fully. "Why didn't you tell me you'd applied?" "Because I knew you'd worry about the money for application fees, and I used my grocery store savings to pay for them. I didn't want you to feel bad about it." Grant's heart broke a little. His daughter was sacrificing her own small savings to pursue a future he should have been able to provide. "Of course you're going to that interview. We'll figure out the work schedule." "But Dad—" "No buts. This is your future we're talking about." Grant moved to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you. Don't you dare let worry about money stop you from reaching for what you deserve." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo. More than you know." Grant climbed the stairs to check on Sophie before leaving for work. His younger daughter was awake, sitting up in bed, with her knees drawn to her chest, trying to breathe quietly so as not to wake anyone. The sound of her labored breathing made his chest tight. "Hey, Soph. How are you feeling?" Sophie looked up at him with eyes that were too old for her 14-year-old face. "I'm okay, Dad. Just tired." Grant sat on the edge of her bed, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. "No fever, which was good. Why don't you stay home today? I can call the school. I have that history test I studied for." Sophie's voice was raspy but determined. "I'll be fine. You don't have to push yourself so hard, honey." "Yes, I do." Sophie's response was quiet but firm. "We all do." Grant kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of his own tears. Both of his daughters had learned lessons about perseverance and sacrifice that no child should have to learn. They'd adapted to their circumstances with grace and maturity that humbled him, but it also filled him with rage at his own inadequacy. As he drove to work in his 15-year-old Honda, Grant mentally ran through his budget for the 100th time. Rent was $800 a month. Utilities averaged another $150. Groceries, gas, insurance, Sophie's medications, Emma's school supplies, it all added up to more than he made, even with overtime. He'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul for months, and now both Peter and Paul were demanding their due. The mall parking lot was nearly empty at 8 in the morning, a sea of cracked asphalt under the grey November sky. Grant parked in the employee section and walked through the service entrance, nodding to the maintenance crew already at work. His supervisor, Dave Martinez, was waiting by the security office with a cup of coffee and a tired expression. "Morning, Grant. You look like hell." "Thanks, Dave. Just what every man wants to hear." Dave had been working at the mall for 12 years, since before the decline started. He was a good man, a fair supervisor, and he'd covered for Grant more than once when family emergencies had conflicted with work schedules. Grant knew Dave was aware of his financial struggles, though they'd never discussed it directly. "Listen, I've got some news," Dave said, settling into his desk chair. "Corporate's been talking about cutting security hours again. Nothing definite yet, but I wanted you to know." Grant's stomach dropped. "How much?" "They're looking at maybe 10 hours a week per guard. I know it's not what you want to hear, but I figured you should have a heads up. 10 hours less per week would mean roughly $200 less per month. It might as well have been 2,000. Grant nodded slowly, trying to keep his expression neutral. "I appreciate you telling me. I'm fighting it, you know. I've told them that reducing security hours is short-sighted, especially with the break-ins we've had lately. But corporate doesn't want to hear about long-term consequences. They just see numbers on a spreadsheet." Grant strapped on his equipment belt, checking his radio and flashlight. "I understand. You do what you can." "There is one thing," Dave said carefully. "I heard through the grapevine that they're looking for someone to take on additional responsibilities. Maintenance, coordination, vendor relations, that sort of thing. It wouldn't be much more money, but it would guarantee your current hours." "What kind of additional responsibilities?" "Basically, you'd be the point person for everything non-retail, the maintenance guys, the cleaning crews, the delivery schedules. It's a lot of coordination, but you've got the organizational skills for it." Grant considered this. More responsibility usually meant more stress, but it also meant job security. "Would I still do security rounds?" "Yeah, but maybe not as many. You'd be more like an operations coordinator who also handles security." It wasn't the career advancement Grant had once dreamed of, but it was better than unemployment. "I'm interested. What do I need to do?" "I'll put in a word with corporate. They like that you're reliable, and they know you understand the property better than anyone. Plus, your EMT background gives you credibility for handling emergencies." Grant's EMT training, the ghost of the path not taken. He'd let that certification lapse because he couldn't afford the continuing education requirements, but the knowledge was still there. Sometimes he wondered what his life would have been like if he'd pursued that career instead of letting circumstances dictate his choices. "Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you thinking of me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Show up, work hard, don't cause problems. That's more than we can say for some people." Grant started his rounds, walking the familiar corridors of Crescent Mall. The morning light filtered through the skylights, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Many of the storefronts were empty, their metal security gates pulled down like closed eyes. The stores that remained open were mostly chains: a discount clothing store, a cell phone repair shop, a small grocery market that served the surrounding neighborhood. He paused at the fountain in the center court, now dry and filled with artificial plants. When he'd first started working here, the fountain had been operational, its gentle splash providing a soothing background to the bustle of shoppers. Now it was just another reminder of better times when the mall had been vibrant and full of life. Grant thought about Emma's scholarship interview, about Sophie's breathing problems, about the eviction notice sitting on his kitchen table. He thought about the choices he'd made over the years, the opportunities he'd missed, the dreams he'd set aside for the sake of immediate survival. At 57, he sometimes felt like he was too old for new beginnings, too set in his patterns to imagine a different life. But then he thought about his daughters, about their resilience and determination, about the way they'd adapted to circumstances without losing their hope for something better. They deserved more than he'd been able to provide. They deserved a father who could give them opportunities instead of limitations. As he completed his first round of the morning, Grant made a silent promise to himself. Whatever it took, however hard he had to work, He would find a way to give his daughters the futures they deserved. The eviction notice might be sitting on his table, but it wasn't the end of their story. It was just another challenge to overcome, another obstacle to push through. He had no idea that in just a few hours, a moment of simple human compassion would change everything. The Tuesday that would change Grant Fletcher's life started like any other. He'd been working at Crescent Mall for 3 years, and the rhythm of his shifts had become as familiar as breathing. Walk the perimeter, check the service doors, monitor the main entrances, repeat. The November afternoon was quiet, with only a handful of shoppers wandering the corridors between the few remaining open stores. Grant was completing his 2 o'clock rounds when he noticed her. She stood near the old fountain in the center court, a woman in her mid-50s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. Her clothes spoke of quality: a well-tailored navy coat, leather boots that had never seen a discount rack, a handbag that probably cost more than Grant made in a month. She looked out of place in the declining mall, like a piece of fine art hung in a thrift store. But it wasn't her expensive appearance that caught Grant's attention. It was the way she was holding herself, one hand pressed against her chest, her breathing rapid and shallow. 20 years of medical training might have expired on paper, but the instincts were still there. Grant recognized the signs of respiratory distress immediately. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her face was pale, almost gray, and Grant could see the muscles in her neck straining with each breath. She tried to speak, but could only manage a whispered, "Can't breathe." Grant's training kicked in without hesitation. "Try to stay calm. I'm going to help you." He guided her to sit on the edge of the fountain, his voice steady and reassuring. "What's your name?" "Evelyn," she gasped. "Evelyn, I'm Grant. I need you to look at me and try to slow your breathing. Do you have asthma?" She nodded frantically, her hand moving to her purse with shaking fingers. "Do you have an inhaler with you?" Another nod. Evelyn's hands were trembling so badly she couldn't open her purse. Grant gently took it from her, careful to maintain her dignity while helping. "Which pocket?" "Side," she wheezed. Grant found the inhaler in the side compartment, a small blue device that looked well used. He checked it quickly, plenty of medication remaining. "Evelyn, I need you to listen to me carefully. We're going to take this slow and easy. Can you sit up straight for me?" She struggled to straighten her posture, and Grant supported her back with one hand while holding the inhaler with the other. His touch was professional, reassuring the same way he would have treated any patient during his EMT days. "Now, I want you to breathe out as much as you can, then put your lips around the mouthpiece." Grant demonstrated the technique, his voice calm and patient. "When I count to 3, press down and breathe in deeply. 1, 2, 3. Evelyn pressed the inhaler and took a deep breath. Grant watched her carefully, noting the color slowly returning to her face. "Good. Now hold that breath for 10 seconds if you can. I'll count for you. 1, 2, 3. He guided her through the entire process, waiting the recommended minute before having her take a second dose. During the wait, he knelt beside her, monitoring her breathing and pulse, his experienced hands gentle but thorough. "You're doing great, Evelyn. I can see your breathing is getting easier already." Grant kept his voice conversational, knowing that staying calm was as important as the medication. "Have you had attacks like this before?" "Not this bad," she managed, her voice stronger now. "Started this morning. I thought it would pass. Sometimes they can build up gradually. The important thing is that you're responding well to the medication." Grant checked his watch, timing the recovery. "How are you feeling now?" Evelyn took a deeper breath, the first really full breath she'd had in hours. "Better. Much better. Thank you." She looked at him with clear eyes for the first time, really seeing him. "You're very good at this. Are you a paramedic?" Grant helped her to her feet, staying close in case she felt dizzy. "I used to be an EMT. These days I'm just mall security." "Just mall security?" Evelyn's voice carried a note of surprise, as if the combination didn't make sense to her. "You probably saved my life just now." Grant felt heat rise in his cheeks. I just did what anyone would do. No. Evelyn's voice was firm, her breathing now steady and strong. What you did was professional, competent, and kind. That's not what just anyone would do. They stood together in the quiet mall, the moment stretching between them. Grant was aware of the contrast they must have made him in his polyester security uniform, with its worn patches and faded insignia. Her in her expensive clothes that probably cost more than his monthly salary. But her eyes held no condescension, only genuine gratitude. I should probably call someone for you, Grant said. A family member or your doctor? I have my phone, Evelyn said, patting her purse. I'll call my physician when I get home. But truly, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here. Grant shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. Like I said, anyone would have helped. Evelyn studied his face for a long moment, as if memorizing it. What's your full name? Grant Fletcher. Well, Grant Fletcher, I owe you a debt I can never repay. She extended her hand, and Grant shook it, noting the strength in her grip despite her recent distress. I hope our paths cross again. Just take care of yourself, ma'am, and maybe check in with your doctor about adjusting your medication. Attacks that severe shouldn't sneak up on you like that. Evelyn smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. I will. Thank you again. Grant watched her walk toward the main exit, her step steady and sure now. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control, which made her vulnerability during the attack all the more striking. At the entrance, she turned back and gave him a small wave before disappearing into the parking lot. Grant returned to his rounds, but his mind kept drifting back to the encounter. There had been something about the woman Evelyn that lingered with him. Not just her obvious wealth, though that was impossible to ignore in their modest surroundings. It was the way she'd looked at him, really looked at him, as if she was seeing something he didn't even see in himself. He completed the rest of his shift mechanically, checking doors and monitoring the handful of evening shoppers. Dave had already gone home for the day, leaving Grant alone with his thoughts and the echoing corridors of the mall. As he drove home that evening, Grant found himself thinking about his expired EMT certification, about the career path he'd abandoned out of necessity. For just a few minutes that afternoon, he'd felt competent and useful in a way that had nothing to do with checking locks or walking perimeters. He'd used skills that mattered, had made a real difference in someone's life. The feeling followed him into his apartment, where Emma was helping Sophie with homework at the kitchen table, and the eviction notice still sat like an accusation beside the salt and pepper shakers. "How was work, Dad?" Emma asked, looking up from Sophie's math book. "Quiet day," Grant said, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair. "How's the breathing, Soph?" "Better today," Sophie said, though Grant could still hear the slight wheeze in her voice. "Mom called from the clinic. They want to try a new inhaler, but insurance won't cover it." Grant's good mood evaporated. "How much?" $200 a month, Emma said quietly. $200 they didn't have. $200 that would help his daughter breathe easier, but would push them even further into debt. Grant thought about the woman he'd helped that afternoon, about her expensive handbag and leather boots, about the effortless way she'd reached for her inhaler without worrying about whether she could afford the refill. "We'll figure something out," Grant said, though he had no idea what. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Grant sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, researching EMT recertification requirements. The courses were available, but they cost money he didn't have and required time he couldn't spare. It was just another reminder of opportunities lost, of the gap between what he'd once hoped to become and what his life had actually delivered. He was about to close the laptop when he heard a car door slam outside. Through his living room window, he could see a black sedan parked at the curb, a luxury vehicle that looked completely out of place in his modest neighborhood. As he watched, a uniformed driver got out and walked toward his building. Grant's first thought was that it was a mistake, that the driver was looking for a different address. But then came the knock at his door, polite but firm. "Grant Fletcher?" The driver was a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform, holding an envelope with Grant's name written in elegant script. "Yes? I have a message for you, sir." Grant took the envelope with trembling fingers, his mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to one of his daughters? Was there some problem at work? The driver tipped his cap and returned to the sedan, leaving Grant standing in his doorway with questions and an envelope that felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Inside, written on expensive stationery in the same elegant script, was a simple message. "Mr. Fletcher, I would very much like to speak with you about a matter of mutual interest. If you're willing, please join me tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. at the address below. I believe you'll find our conversation worthwhile. With gratitude, Evelyn Cross." Grant read the note 3 times before the name registered. Evelyn Cross. He'd heard that name before, seen it in the local newspaper in connection with various charitable donations and business ventures. Evelyn Cross, one of the wealthiest women in the state, whose anonymous philanthropy had funded everything from hospital wings to scholarship programs. The woman he'd helped that afternoon wasn't just wealthy, she was Evelyn Cross. And now she wanted to meet with him. Grant Fletcher had never been inside a house that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. As the uniformed driver led him up the circular driveway to Evelyn Cross's estate, he felt increasingly out of place. In his one good suit, the same navy blue outfit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral 5 years ago, and to every job interview since. The house wasn't ostentatious in the way he'd expected. Instead of gaudy displays of wealth, it spoke of quiet elegance and old money. The brick facade was weathered but immaculate, the landscaping perfectly maintained without being showy. It was the kind of place that whispered rather than shouted its affluence. Evelyn met him at the door herself, which surprised him. He'd expected a butler or housekeeper, but instead found her in casual clothes-dark slacks and a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than his monthly rent, but looked comfortable and lived in. "Grant, thank you for coming." Her smile was warm and genuine, the same expression she'd worn when thanking him at the mall. "Please, come in." The interior was as understated as the exterior, filled with comfortable furniture and family photographs, rather than the museum-quality art Grant had imagined. Evelyn led him to a sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth, and 2 cups of coffee waited on a side table. "I hope you don't mind that I did some research after our encounter yesterday," Evelyn said, settling into a chair across from him. "I was curious about the man who helped me." Grant shifted uncomfortably. "What kind of research?" "Nothing invasive, I assure you. Just public records, employment history. I learned that you've been working at the mall for 3 years, that you have 2 daughters, that you were widowed 5 years ago." Her voice carried genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Grant wasn't sure how he felt about being investigated, even with good intentions. "May I ask why you wanted to know?" Evelyn picked up a glossy brochure from the coffee table and handed it to him. The cover showed smiling families, community gardens, and children in graduation caps. The Cross Foundation was emblazoned across the top in elegant gold lettering. "This is what I do with my time and money," Evelyn explained as Grant flipped through the pages. "Community development, education initiatives, healthcare access for underserved populations. We operate in 12 states, but we're looking to expand our presence here in the Midwest." Grant studied the brochure, impressed despite himself. The foundation's scope was enormous: scholarship programs, job training centers, medical clinics, housing assistance. "This is incredible work." "It's my life's passion," Evelyn said. "But I'm getting older, and I need someone I can trust to oversee our local operations. Someone with integrity, someone who understands what it means to serve others without expecting recognition or reward." The implication hung in the air between them, and Grant felt his heart begin to race. "Ms. Cross." "Evelyn, please." "Evelyn, I'm flattered, but I'm not qualified for this kind of work. I'm a security guard with a high school education and some expired medical training." "You're wrong about that." Evelyn's voice was firm but kind. What I saw yesterday wasn't someone going through the motions of a job. I saw someone who instinctively put another person's needs before his own comfort, who knew exactly what to do in a crisis, who treated a stranger with dignity and compassion. Those qualities can't be taught, Grant. They're either part of who you are or they're not. Grant set down the brochure, his hands trembling slightly. Even if that were true, I couldn't just walk away from my current job. My daughters depend on me. Of course they do, and this position would provide for them far better than mall security ever could. Evelyn reached for another folder, this one containing what looked like a job description. The salary would be $80,000 a year to start, with full healthcare benefits for you and your family. There's also an education fund that would cover college tuition for Emma and Sophie. $80,000. Grant tried to process the number. It was more than twice what he made at the mall, more money than he'd ever imagined earning. With that salary, he could move his daughters out of their cramped apartment, get Sophie the medical care she needed, ensure Emma could attend any college she chose. This is very generous, Grant said carefully, but I have to ask why me? Surely you could find someone with better credentials, more experience in non-profit work. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup as she seemed to consider her words. Can I tell you something about myself, Grant? Something I don't share with many people. He nodded. I built my wealth through technology software development, data analysis, systems management, very cold, very logical work. But I got into it because I wanted to solve problems, to make people's lives better through innovation. She paused, looking into the fire. Somewhere along the way, I lost touch with the human element. I became very good at identifying problems from spreadsheets and databases, but I forgot how to connect with the people those problems affected. I find that hard to believe. Yesterday, when I couldn't breathe, when I was frightened and vulnerable, you didn't see a wealthy woman or a potential donor or a networking opportunity. You saw a person who needed help, and you helped. No calculations, no agenda, just compassion. Evelyn met his eyes. That's what this foundation needs. Someone who sees people first, problems second. Grant felt overwhelmed by her faith in him, but also terrified. I wouldn't know where to start. You'd start by learning. We'd pair you with our regional coordinator for the first 6 months, give you comprehensive training in grant management, program development, community outreach. You'd have a full support staff and complete access to our resources. Evelyn leaned forward. But most importantly, you'd have the autonomy to run programs the way you think they should be run, based on what your community actually needs. The offer was everything Grant had never dared to dream of: financial security, meaningful work, a chance to make a real difference. But it also felt too good to be true, like a fairy tale that would evaporate if he reached for it. Can I ask you something? Grant said. Of course. Yesterday, you said I probably saved your life. But you're offering me far more than what anyone would consider appropriate gratitude. This feels like charity, and I have to be honest, that makes me uncomfortable. Evelyn smiled, and Grant caught a glimpse of the sharp intelligence that had built her fortune. You think I'm offering you this position out of some misguided sense of obligation? The thought had crossed my mind. Grant, I donate millions of dollars every year to various causes. If I wanted to simply thank you for helping me, I could write you a check and be done with it. Her expression grew more serious. This offer isn't about gratitude. It's about recognizing potential and putting the right person in a position where they can do the most good. Grant wanted to believe her, but years of disappointment had taught him to be wary of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. What if I'm not what you think I am? What if I disappoint you? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. But I don't think it will. Evelyn reached for one more document, a formal contract with his name already typed at the top. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Take this home, read it over, discuss it with your daughters. But Grant, don't let fear or false modesty keep you from accepting something that could change not just your life, but the lives of countless people in your community. As Grant drove home with the contract on the passenger seat beside him, his mind raced with possibilities and doubts in equal measure. The eviction notice was still sitting on his kitchen table, but now there was hope sitting next to it in the form of a job offer that could solve every financial problem his family faced. The question wasn't whether he wanted the position, of course he did. The question was whether he had the courage to believe he deserved it. Emma was at the kitchen table when Grant returned home, surrounded by college application materials that had become a familiar sight over the past few months. The papers were organized in neat stacks: acceptances, financial aid packages, scholarship applications, each one representing a dream that felt increasingly out of reach. "How did it go?" Emma asked, looking up from the essay she was editing on her laptop. Grant set the contract on the table next to her papers, the elegant letterhead catching the overhead light. "It went well. Better than well, actually." Sophie emerged from the living room where she'd been watching television, her breathing noticeably easier since starting the new medication that Grant had somehow managed to scrape together money for. Both girls gathered around the table as Grant explained the evening's conversation. $80,000, Sophie's eyes went wide. "Dad, that's like more than we've ever had," Emma finished quietly. She picked up the contract, scanning the terms with the careful attention she brought to all important documents. "This is real? She's really offering you this job?" "It appears so." Grant sat down heavily, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "But I want to know what you two think. This would change everything for our family." Emma continued reading, her expression growing more amazed with each page. "Dad, look at this education benefit. It would cover full tuition, room and board, books, everything. I could go to any college I wanted without worrying about money. And the healthcare coverage includes specialists," Sophie added, reading over her sister's shoulder. "I could see that pulmonologist Dr. Martinez wanted to refer me to." Grant watched his daughters' faces light up with possibilities that had been impossible just hours before. Their excitement was infectious, but it also terrified him. What if he took the job and failed? What if Evelyn realized she'd made a mistake and he lost everything? "There's something else we need to talk about," Grant said. "I spoke with Dave today about the security position. Corporate is cutting hours for all guards. Even if I stayed, I'd be looking at probably a 30% reduction in pay." The girls exchanged glances. They'd both been working part-time jobs to help with expenses, Emma at the grocery store, Sophie babysitting for neighbor Sand. Grant knew they'd been worried about their family's financial stability even before the eviction notice arrived. "So staying isn't really an option anyway," Emma said pragmatically. "Not if we want to keep this apartment," Grant admitted. "Though even with the reduced hours, we'd probably be looking at having to move somewhere cheaper." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "Cheaper than this place? Is that even possible?" Despite everything, Grant found himself smiling. His younger daughter had inherited her mother's gift for finding humor in difficult situations. "There are always cheaper options, sweetheart. They're just not necessarily better options." Emma had finished reading the contract and was now staring at Grant with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you afraid of?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "This job, it's everything we need. Good money, benefits, meaningful work that you'd actually be good at. But you look terrified. What's scaring you?" Grant considered her question, trying to put his fears into words. "I guess I'm afraid that I'm not the person she thinks I am. What if I take this job and discover that I can't do it? What if I let her down, and let you girls down in the process?" "Dad," Sophie moved to sit beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "You raised us by yourself after Mum died. You worked 3 jobs when you had to. You learned EMT skills at night school while taking care of a baby and a toddler. You've never let us down." "This is different," Grant protested. "This is professional work, managing programs, dealing with budgets and bureaucracy. This is helping people." Emma interrupted. "Which is what you've been doing your whole life. The only difference is that now you'd get paid properly for it and have the resources to help more people." Grant looked at his daughters, really looked at them. When had Emma become so wise, so able to see past his self-doubt to the core of what mattered? When had Sophie developed such confidence in his abilities? Somewhere along the way, while he'd been focused on just getting through each day, they'd grown into remarkable young women who believed in him more than he believed in himself. "There's one more thing," Grant said, pulling out his phone. "Evelyn gave me the number for the regional coordinator who would be training me. She said I could call him tonight if I wanted to ask questions." "So call him," Emma said simply. Grant dialed the number, putting the phone on speaker so the girls could listen. A warm voice answered on the second ring. "Michael Torres." "Mr. Torres, this is Grant Fletcher. Evelyn Cross gave me your number. She said I could call about the foundation position." "Grant, Evelyn told me about you. I've been hoping you'd call." Michael's enthusiasm was immediately apparent. "What questions can I answer?" "Well, I have to be honest, I don't have any background in non-profit work. I'm concerned about whether I'd be qualified." Michael chuckled. "You know what's funny? That's exactly what I said when Evelyn offered me my position 8 years ago. I was a high school guidance counselor who'd helped her niece with college applications. I thought she'd lost her mind. And how did it work out? Best decision I ever made. The foundation doesn't just hire people with non-profit experience, Grant. We hire people with heart, with integrity, with a genuine desire to serve their communities. The technical skills can be learned. The character can't." Grant felt some of his tension ease. What would the first few months look like? "You'd spend 2 weeks at our main office in Chicago, learning our systems and procedures. Then you'd return home and I'd work with you closely for the first 6 months, weekly video calls, site visits, whatever support you need. You'd also have a local assistant and access to our full administrative team." "And the work itself?" "It varies. Some days you might be reviewing grant applications from local non-profits. Other days you could be visiting schools to assess their needs or meeting with community leaders about housing initiatives. The best part is that you'd have real autonomy to identify problems in your area and develop solutions." After Grant hung up, the three of them sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Emma had returned to her college applications, but now she was looking at schools she'd previously dismissed as too expensive. Sophie was reading through the health benefits information with the focused attention of someone who'd learned to navigate medical bureaucracy at too young an age. "I think you should do it, Dad," Sophie said finally. "Not just for us, but for you. You deserve to have work that matters." Emma nodded in agreement. "Mom always said you were meant to help people. This sounds like exactly what she would have wanted for you." Grant felt tears prick his eyes at the mention of Sarah. His wife had always been his biggest supporter, the one who'd encouraged him to pursue his EMT training, who'd believed he could do anything he set his mind to. She'd also been pragmatic enough to understand when family circumstances required him to set aside his dreams for more immediate needs. But what would she say about this opportunity? Grant thought he knew. She'd tell him to stop being afraid of success, to trust that the skills and character that had carried him through loss and hardship would serve him well in this new role. "Okay," Grant said quietly. "I'll call Evelyn tomorrow and accept the position." Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad." "We both are," Sophie added. As his daughters returned to their homework and evening routines, Grant sat with the contract in front of him, imagining the life it represented. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream about a future that offered more than just survival. A future where his daughters could pursue their ambitions without worry, where he could use his skills and experience to make a real difference in his community. The eviction notice was still on the table, but it no longer felt like a verdict. Instead, it felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of something entirely new. 3 weeks into his new position, Grant Fletcher stood in what would soon become the Cross Foundation's Midwest Regional Headquarters, holding a comprehensive community needs assessment that painted a sobering picture of his hometown. The abandoned department store that Evelyn had purchased sat in the heart of downtown, its large windows offering a view of empty storefronts and cracked sidewalks that told the story of economic decline. The assessment was thorough and heartbreaking. 38% of local families qualified for food assistance. The high school graduation rate had dropped to 62%. The nearest mental health facility was 40 miles away. Housing costs consumed more than 50% of median household income, even in a town where property values had been declining for a decade. These numbers represent real people, Grant murmured to himself, flipping through pages of statistics that had once been abstract concepts but now carried the weight of personal understanding. He'd lived these struggles, had seen them in his neighbors' faces, in his daughter's careful budgeting, in his own sleepless nights spent calculating bills. Michael Torres looked up from his laptop, where he was reviewing grant applications. The regional coordinator had been in town for the past week, helping Grant establish systems and procedures for their new operation. That's exactly why Evelyn chose you for this position. These aren't just numbers to you, they're your community. Grant set down the assessment and walked to the window, looking out at the intersection where he'd learned to drive 30 years ago. I keep thinking about all the people I see at the grocery store, at the gas station, struggling just like my family was struggling. Now I have the resources to actually help them, and I'm not sure where to start. You start with one family at a time, Michael said. That's how sustainable change happens, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, targeted assistance that addresses real needs. The Foundation's Chicago headquarters had provided Grant with more training than he'd ever imagined possible. 2 intensive weeks of learning grant management, program development, community outreach strategies, and financial oversight. He'd returned home with a head full of procedures and protocols, but also with a clear understanding of the Foundation's philosophy: identify local needs, develop local solutions, and measure success by sustainable improvement in people's lives. Tell me about your first 3 program proposals, Michael said, pulling up a chair beside Grant's desk. Grant retrieved a folder containing his initial project plans, work that had consumed his evenings for the past week. The first one is a partnership with the school district. They need after-school programs that provide both academic support and basic nutrition. A lot of kids are going home to empty houses with nothing to eat until the next school breakfast. Good. What's your budget estimate? $60,000 for the first year, including staff, supplies, and food. We could serve about 150 kids daily. Michael nodded approvingly. That's very reasonable. The Foundation typically approves programs that demonstrate clear need and realistic implementation plans. What's your second proposal? Healthcare access. Grant felt his passion for this project evident in his voice. The free clinic is overwhelmed, and people can't afford to travel to specialists in the city. I want to establish a mobile health unit that rotates through the rural areas twice a week. Now that's ambitious. What kind of services? Basic primary care, prescription management, health screenings, and referrals for serious conditions. I've already spoken with 3 physicians who would volunteer their time if we can provide the infrastructure. Michael was taking notes, his expression increasingly impressed. And the third? Housing assistance. Grant hesitated, knowing this one was more complex. Not just rental assistance, but a comprehensive program that includes financial counseling, job training, and pathways to homeownership. Too many families are trapped in cycles of poverty because they can't build equity or stability. That's exactly the kind of systemic thinking the Foundation values, Michael said. These aren't band-aid solutions, they're investments in long-term community health. Grant felt a surge of confidence that was still new and fragile. For years, he'd survived by keeping his head down and focusing on immediate needs. Now he was being encouraged to think bigger, to imagine solutions rather than just enduring problems. There's something else I want to discuss, Grant said, pulling out another document. I've been researching other organizations in the area that are doing good work, but struggling with funding. Instead of duplicating their efforts, I think we should support and expand what's already working. Michael leaned forward with interest. Show me what you've found. Grant spread out information about local non-profits, a food bank that had been operating out of a church basement for 15 years, a job training program run by the community college that was chronically underfunded, a domestic violence shelter that could only accommodate 8 women at a time. These people have been serving this community long before the foundation arrived, Grant explained. They know what works and what doesn't. Rather than starting from scratch, we could provide them with the resources to expand their impact. That's smart thinking, Michael said. Community partnerships are always more effective than trying to reinvent the wheel. Have you reached out to any of these organizations? I've scheduled meetings with all of them for next week. I want to understand their needs and see how we can support their missions without taking over their operations. Michael closed his laptop and turned to face Grant directly. I have to tell you, in 8 years with the foundation, I've rarely seen someone adapt to this work as quickly as you have. Your background gives you credibility with the community that can't be taught or faked. Grant felt heat rise in his cheeks. I'm just trying to be thorough. It's more than that. You understand instinctively that sustainable change requires community buy-in, local leadership, and respect for existing efforts. A lot of people come into non-profit work thinking they're going to save everyone, but end up creating dependencies instead of solutions. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Through the large windows, Grant could see a woman in her 30s with 2 young children, looking uncertain but determined. "Excuse me," Grant said, walking to the door. "Can I help you?" "I heard there might be some kind of assistance program starting up here," the woman said, her voice carrying the careful pride of someone who'd never asked for help before. "I'm Maria Santos. My husband lost his job at the plant 6 months ago, and we're having trouble making ends meet." Grant's heart clenched with recognition. He'd stood in similar doorways, swallowed similar pride, made similar requests for help. "Please come in. I'm Grant Fletcher, and this is exactly why we're here." As he led Maria and her children inside, offering them chairs and something to drink, Grant realized that all the training and planning in the world meant nothing compared to this moment, the first person brave enough to walk through their door and ask for help. Michael watched from across the room as Grant spoke with Maria, his voice gentle and respectful, his questions designed to understand rather than judge. When the woman mentioned that her children qualified for free school meals, but there was no food assistance during school breaks, Grant immediately thought of the after-school program proposal and began to envision how it could be expanded. After Maria left with information about emergency food assistance and a promise that Grant would personally follow up on her husband's job search, Michael smiled at his colleague. "Now you're really beginning to understand what this work is about," he said. "It's not about programs and proposals and budgets, though those things matter. It's about moments like that one, when someone trusts you enough to share their struggles and you have the resources to actually help." Grant looked around the space that was slowly transforming from an abandoned store into a community resource center. For the first time since accepting Evelyn's offer, he felt truly confident that he belonged here, that this work was not just a job, but a calling he'd been moving toward his entire life. Grant Fletcher kept his late wife's wedding ring in a small wooden box on his dresser, a circle of white gold that had become both a comfort and a barrier over the past 5 years. Each morning, he would see it while getting dressed for work, and each evening, it would be there when he returned home, a reminder of love lost and promises that death had made impossible to keep. Tonight, as he prepared for the Foundation's first community advisory meeting, Grant found himself holding the ring longer than usual. Sarah's presence had been particularly strong lately, as if she were watching him navigate this new chapter of his life. He could almost hear her voice, encouraging him to be brave, to trust his instincts, to remember that helping others had always been his gift. "Dad, Evelyn's here," Emma called from downstairs. Grant carefully placed the ring back in its box and headed down to meet his daughters and his colleague, though, lately, Evelyn had become something more complicated than a colleague, something he wasn't quite ready to name. Evelyn stood in their small living room, looking effortlessly elegant despite the modest surroundings. Over the past month, she'd been spending more time in town, often stopping by the foundation office to check on their progress. Her presence had become a source of both comfort and confusion for Grant, who found himself looking forward to her visits while simultaneously feeling guilty for the growing warmth he felt toward her. "Are you ready for tonight?" Evelyn asked, her eyes carrying the gentle concern that had become familiar to him. "As ready as I can be," Grant said. 37 community leaders in one room, all with different opinions about what our priorities should be. Sophie looked up from her homework at the kitchen table. "Dad's been practicing his presentation for 3 days," she said with a grin. "Emma and I could probably give it ourselves by now." Evelyn laughed, a sound that never failed to lift Grant's spirits. "That's exactly the kind of preparation that will make tonight successful. The community needs to see that you take their input seriously." As they drove to the meeting at the community center, Grant found himself studying Evelyn's profile in the passenger seat. She'd been more open about her personal life lately, sharing stories about her childhood, her early struggles in business, her regrets about choices that had prioritized career over relationships. He'd learned that she'd never married, had devoted herself entirely to building her company and later her foundation, and sometimes wondered what she'd missed along the way. "Can I ask you something?" Grant said as they pulled into the parking lot. "Of course. Why did you really choose me for this position? And please don't say it's because I helped you with your inhaler. I know there's more to it than that." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Do you remember what you said to me that day at the mall after you helped me?" "Not exactly. You said that anyone would have done the same thing. But Grant, that's not true. I've lived long enough to know that genuine compassion, the kind that acts without calculating the cost or benefit, is actually quite rare." She turned to face him. "I've spent years trying to help communities through programs and policies, but I've always felt like I was operating from a distance. You don't operate from a distance. You understand struggle because you've lived it, and you help people because it's who you are, not because it's your job." Grant felt the familiar discomfort that came with praise, but also something else, growing sense that maybe Evelyn saw him more clearly than he saw himself. The community meeting was larger than Grant had expected. The room was filled with teachers, business owners, church leaders, parents, and teenagers. Dave Martinez from the mall was there, along with several of Grant's former co-workers. Maria Santos sat in the front row with her husband, who'd found part-time work through one of the foundation's job placement partners. Grant stood at the front of the room, his hands steady despite his nerves. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Grant Fletcher, and 6 weeks ago I was working security at Crescent Mall, worrying about how to pay my rent and provide for my daughters. Tonight, I'm here as the director of the Cross Foundation's local operations, and I want to talk to you about how we can work together to strengthen our community." A murmur went through the room. Grant's honesty about his recent circumstances had clearly surprised some people, but he pressed on. "I'm not here as an expert or an outsider bringing solutions from somewhere else. I'm here as your neighbor, someone who's lived the same struggles many of you face every day. The foundation has given me resources I never dreamed of having, and I want to use those resources to address the problems we all see but haven't had the means to solve." Grant presented his 3 initial program proposals, but he spent more time asking questions than providing answers. What did parents need most for their children? What barriers prevented adults from accessing healthcare or job training? What would success look like in 5 years? The responses were immediate and passionate. Teachers talked about students coming to school hungry. Business owners discussed the challenges of finding qualified workers. Parents shared concerns about after-school supervision and summer programming. Healthcare workers described the impossible choices people made between medication and other necessities. "These are exactly the issues we want to address," Grant said, "but not with programs designed in a conference room somewhere. We want to develop solutions that make sense for our specific community, with input from the people who will actually use these services." An older woman in the back raised her hand. "This all sounds wonderful, Mr. Fletcher, but we've heard promises before. How do we know this foundation won't lose interest and move on to the next town when the novelty wears off? It was a fair question, and Grant had been expecting it. I understand your skepticism, Mrs. Patterson, but this isn't a short-term project for me. This is my home, these are my neighbors, and this is where my daughters are going to graduate from high school. I have every reason to make sure these programs succeed because their success directly affects my family's future. Evelyn watched from the side of the room as Grant fielded questions and concerns with patience and genuine engagement. She'd attended dozens of similar meetings over the years, but she'd never seen a community respond with such openness and trust. Grant's authenticity was magnetic. People believed him because he was one of them, because his success was tied to their success. After the meeting, as people lingered to continue conversations and exchange contact information, Evelyn approached Grant with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That was remarkable," she said quietly. "I've never seen a community embrace a foundation representative like that." "It helped that half of them already knew me," Grant said, but he felt proud of how the evening had gone. "It wasn't familiarity, Grant. It was trust. They trust you because you've earned it, because you understand their lives in a way that most people in your position never could." As they drove home, Grant found himself thinking about the evening's conversations, about the hope he'd seen in people's faces, about the possibility of actually making a difference in lives that had been written off by larger economic forces. "Evelyn," he said as they pulled up to his apartment building, "thank you, not just for the job, but for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." She touched his hand briefly, a gesture that sent warmth through his entire arm. "You're going to do great things here, Grant. I can see it already." After she left, Grant sat in his living room with his daughters, debriefing the evening's events. Emma was excited about the education initiatives they'd discussed, while Sophie was particularly interested in the healthcare access programs. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Sophie said as they were getting ready for bed. "Sure, sweetheart. Do you think Mom would be proud of what you're doing?" Grant felt tears prick his eyes. "I think she'd be amazed, and I think she'd remind me that the best way to honor her memory is to keep helping people the way she always encouraged me to do." Later that night, as he prepared for bed, Grant looked at Sarah's ring one more time. For the first time in 5 years, he found himself wondering if maybe someday there might be room in his heart for new love alongside the old. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure, but tonight it didn't feel like a betrayal, it felt like a possibility. The medical records arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by the same uniformed driver who had first brought Evelyn's invitation to Grant's apartment. This time, however, the envelope felt heavier, and Grant noticed the tremor in the driver's usually steady hands as he passed it over. Grant was alone in the foundation office, reviewing applications for the after-school program that would launch next month. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of planning, meetings, and program development. 3 initiatives were already approved and funded, with 2 more in the pipeline. The community response had exceeded every expectation, and Grant had begun to feel genuinely confident in his new role. The envelope was addressed in Evelyn's careful handwriting, but something about it felt different from her usual correspondence. Grant opened it with growing unease, expecting perhaps another program proposal or budget revision. Instead, he found himself staring at medical records from University Hospital's pulmonary department, dated just 3 days earlier. The terminology was complex, but Grant's EMT training helped him understand the essential facts. Progressive idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Estimated prognosis, 18 to 24 months with current treatment options. No cure available. Palliative care recommended as condition deteriorates. Grant read the documents 3 times before the full weight of them settled in his chest like a physical blow. Evelyn was dying. Not someday, not eventually, but soon. The asthma attack that had brought them together hadn't been asthma at all. It had been the early symptom of a degenerative lung condition that would slowly rob her of the ability to breathe. Attached to the medical records was a letter in Evelyn's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Grant, I owe you the truth about my condition, and I owe you an explanation for why I chose you for this position when I did. The doctors tell me I have perhaps 2 years, possibly less. My lungs are failing, and there's nothing medical science can do to stop the progression. What you witnessed at the mall was my first serious breathing episode, though I'd been experiencing minor symptoms for months. I need you to understand that my offer of employment was not charity, nor was it simply gratitude for your help that day. It was desperation of a different kind, the desperate need to find someone I could trust with the continuation of work that has become my life's purpose. I have spent 40 years building wealth, and the last 15 years trying to use that wealth meaningfully. The foundation represents everything I hope to leave behind when I'm gone. I should have told you about my diagnosis from the beginning, but I was afraid you would see the job offer as pity, or worse, as the desperate gesture of a dying woman trying to ease her conscience. I needed you to see the position for what it truly is, an opportunity to serve your community and build something lasting. I needed you to want the work for its own sake, not because you felt sorry for me. Now that you've proven yourself, and you have, far beyond my highest expectations, I felt you deserved to know the truth. You deserve to understand the urgency with which I've been pushing certain initiatives and why I've been spending so much time in your town instead of Chicago. Every day matters now, Grant. Every program we establish, every relationship we build, every system we put in place is part of ensuring that this work continues long after I'm gone. You're under no obligation to change anything about our working relationship because of this news. In fact, I hope you won't. I hope you'll continue to see me as your colleague and friend, not as someone to be pitied or handled with excessive care. I have good days and bad days, but I intend to make the most of whatever time remains. There is one favor I must ask, however. Please don't share this information with Emma and Sophie yet. I've grown quite fond of your daughters, and I don't want their memories of our time together to be overshadowed by sadness. When the time comes, and you'll know when that is, I trust you to tell them in whatever way feels right. With deep affection and gratitude, Evelyn. Grant set the letter down with hands that were no longer steady. The quiet office suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in as he tried to process what he'd just learned. Evelyn, brilliant, generous, strong, Evelyn was dying, and she'd been carrying this knowledge alone while helping him rebuild his life, while planning programs that would serve their community for years to come. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Evelyn herself, her voice carrying the same warmth it always had. "Grant, I assume you've received my package by now." "I have." Grant's voice came out rougher than he intended. "And how are you feeling about what you've learned?" Grant struggled to find words. Angry, sad, confused, grateful, guilty. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with angry," Evelyn said gently. "I think that's probably the most honest response. You should have told me from the beginning. I had a right to know why you were really offering me this position." "You're absolutely right. I should have been honest with you from the start. But Grant, if I had told you that first night that I was terminally ill and looking for someone to carry on my work, would you have believed that the job offer was based on your merits?" Grant considered this and reluctantly had to admit she was probably right. He would have assumed the position was charity, would have questioned every aspect of her faith in his abilities. "The thing is," Evelyn continued, "everything I told you about why I chose you was true. Your character, your compassion, your understanding of struggle, none of that had anything to do with my diagnosis. My illness simply gave me a sense of urgency about finding the right person." "How long have you known?" "About the progression? 6 months. But I've been feeling symptoms for over a year. I kept telling myself it was just stress, or age, or too many years of working too hard." There was a pause. "The day you helped me at the mall was the day I finally admitted to myself that something was seriously wrong." Grant closed his eyes, remembering her frightened face, her struggle to breathe, the way she'd gripped his hand while he helped her with the inhaler. "I should have insisted you see a doctor right away. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You helped me through the crisis, and you treated me with dignity and kindness. That's when I knew you were the person I'd been looking for." Evelyn Grant started, then stopped, not sure how to voice what he was feeling. "What is it?" "I care about you. More than I should, probably. More than I'm ready to admit to myself. And now I find out that just when I'm learning to—" He stopped again, unable to finish. "Learning to what, Grant?" "Learning to trust that maybe I could love someone again. Learning to believe that maybe Sarah would want me to be happy with someone else." The words came out in a rush, surprising him with their honesty. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "Grant, can I tell you something? These past 2 months, working with you, seeing your daughters, being part of your family's life, it's been the happiest I've been in years. Decades, maybe. I've spent most of my adult life building companies and foundations, but I've never really built relationships. I've never had what you have with Emma and Sophie. But now we have whatever time we have. It might be 2 years, it might be less. But that doesn't make it meaningless, Grant. If anything, it makes it more precious." Grant found himself thinking about Sarah, about the 2 short time they'd had together, about how he'd learned that love wasn't measured in length but in depth. What happens to the foundation when I die? The foundation is well established and well funded. You'll continue as regional director with complete autonomy. I've already made arrangements to ensure your position and salary are secure for as long as you want to stay. The work we're building together will outlast both of us." After they hung up, Grant sat alone with the weight of knowledge he hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Evelyn was dying, and somehow that revelation made his feelings for her both more complicated and more clear. He'd been falling in love with her, carefully and slowly, fighting against guilt and loyalty to Sarah's memory. Now he faced the possibility of love and loss intertwined in ways he'd never imagined. That evening, he watched Evelyn interact with his daughters over dinner, seeing her differently now that he knew about her condition. She showed no signs of self-pity or fear, only the same warm engagement she'd always displayed. Emma was telling her about her college acceptance letters, while Sophie was describing her improved breathing since starting the new treatment program the Foundation's healthcare initiative had made possible. "Dad says we might be able to visit some colleges over spring break," Emma said excitedly. "I never thought I'd actually be able to choose between different schools." "That's wonderful," Evelyn said, her eyes bright with genuine happiness. "Your father is quite right to be proud of you both." Grant watched the woman he was learning to love mentor his daughters, knowing that their time together was limited in ways they couldn't imagine. The knowledge was both heartbreaking and precious a reminder that every moment mattered, that love found late in life was no less real for being brief. The Foundation charter lay spread across Grant's kitchen table like a map to a future he'd never dared to imagine. The legal documents, prepared by Evelyn's attorneys, would officially establish him as the permanent director of the Cross Foundation's Midwest operations, with full authority to approve programs up to $2 million annually and complete autonomy over local operations. Emma sat across from him, reading through the papers, with the careful attention she brought to everything important. At 17, she'd developed a maturity that both impressed and saddened Grant too. Much responsibility too young, but also a strength that would serve her well in college and beyond. "Dad, this is incredible," Emma said, looking up from the section detailing the Foundation's educational initiatives. "You'll be able to help hundreds of families like ours." Sophie emerged from the kitchen with 3 cups of tea, moving more easily than she had in months. The new treatment program had made a remarkable difference in her breathing, and for the first time in years, Grant wasn't worried about her health during the changing seasons. "When do you sign it?" Sophie asked, settling into her chair. "Next Friday, at the community celebration," Grant said. "Evelyn wanted it to be public, to show everyone that this isn't a temporary program but a permanent investment in our town." What Grant didn't tell his daughters was that Evelyn's condition had worsened noticeably over the past month. Her breathing was more labored, her energy lower, though she continued to work with the same passion and determination she'd always shown. The doctors had adjusted her prognosis from 18 months to perhaps 12, and Grant could see the urgency in her planning, the way she pushed to finalize every detail of the Foundation's future operations. "There's something else I need to discuss with you both," Grant said, his voice carrying a weight that made both girls look up with immediate attention. Emma set down her teacup. "What is it?" Grant had been dreading this conversation for weeks, but he couldn't postpone it any longer. "It's about Evelyn, about her health." He told them about the medical records, about the progressive lung disease, about the limited time they had left together. He watched his daughters' faces as they processed the information: Emma's immediate tears, Sophie's shocked silence, then both of them asking questions he didn't have answers for. "How long does she have?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors aren't sure. Maybe a year, maybe less." Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Does she know that we know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first, to prepare you. She doesn't want to be treated differently, doesn't want people walking on eggshells around her." "That's so like her," Emma said with a sad smile. "Even dying, she's more worried about other people's feelings than her own." Grant reached across the table to take his daughter's hands. "I need you both to understand something. What we've built with Evelyn, the work we're doing, the foundation, none of that changes because of her diagnosis. If anything, it becomes more important. This is her legacy, and she's trusting us to carry it forward." "Of course we will," Sophie said fiercely. "But Dad, what about you and her? We can see how you feel about each other." Grant felt heat rise in his cheeks. He'd thought he'd been more subtle about his growing feelings for Evelyn, but apparently his daughters saw more than he'd realized. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Because of Mom?" Emma asked gently. Grant nodded. "I loved your mother deeply. I never thought I'd feel that way about anyone else. But Evelyn, she's become important to me in ways I didn't expect." "Dad," Sophie said, her voice carrying surprising wisdom for her 14 years, "Mom would want you to be happy. She'd want you to love someone who makes you a better person, someone who loves us too. And Evelyn does both of those things," Emma added. "We can see how much happier you are when she's around, how much more confident you've become. Mom would approve." Grant felt tears threatening, even knowing that our time together would be limited. "Especially knowing that," Emma said. "Didn't Mom always say that love isn't about how long you have together, but about how deeply you connect while you can?" The next week passed in a blur of final preparations for the Foundation's official launch celebration. The event would mark not only Grant's formal appointment as director, but also the announcement of the first year's program initiatives. The community center had been transformed with displays showing the after-school program, the mobile health clinic, and the housing assistance initiative that had already helped 12 families find stable accommodation. Grant found himself working longer hours, partly because of the event planning, but mostly because he wanted everything to be perfect for Evelyn. She'd given him an opportunity that had transformed his family's life, and he wanted to show her and the community that her faith in him had been justified. On Wednesday evening, as they worked together in the Foundation office, finalizing the program announcements, Evelyn had a severe coughing episode that left her struggling to catch her breath. Grant immediately moved to help her, but she waved him off, reaching for her oxygen inhaler and working through the crisis with practiced efficiency. "I'm fine," she said when she could speak again, though Grant could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "You're not fine," Grant said gently, "and you don't have to pretend to be fine with me." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then set down her pen and pushed back from the desk. "Grant, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Are you staying in this position because you believe in the work, or because you feel obligated to a dying woman?" The question caught Grant off guard with its directness. "What kind of question is that?" "An important one. I've seen the way you look at me lately, the careful concern, the way you've started treating me like I might break. I need to know that you're here because you want to be, not because you feel sorry for me." Grant stood up and moved around the desk to sit beside her. "Evelyn, 3 months ago I was a security guard counting down days until eviction. Today I'm running programs that are making real differences in people's lives. I wake up excited about work for the first time in years. That's not obligation, that's purpose." "And personally?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Grant took her hand, feeling the coolness of her skin, the slight tremor that had developed over the past few weeks. Personally, I'm terrified. Not of your illness, but of how much I've come to care about you. I spent 5 years convinced I'd used up my capacity for love, and then you walked into my life and proved me wrong. Grant, let me finish, he said. I know our time is limited. I know this isn't the fairy tale romance where we grow old together, but that doesn't make what I feel for you any less real or any less important. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I've never had this, you know. A relationship where someone loved me for who I am rather than what I could provide. I've spent so much of my life focused on business and foundation work that I forgot about the possibility of personal happiness. And now I'm grateful for whatever time we have, even if it's measured in months rather than years. Grant leaned forward and kissed her gently, a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. When they separated, Evelyn was smiling through her tears. There's something I want to ask you, Grant said, his heart racing with a decision he'd been considering for weeks. I know it might seem fast, and I know our circumstances are unusual, but, Grant Fletcher, are you about to propose to me? Grant laughed, surprised by her directness. I suppose I am, not because I feel sorry for you, and not because I'm trying to make some grand romantic gesture, but because I love you, and because whatever time we have together, I want to spend it as your husband. Evelyn was quiet for so long that Grant began to worry he'd made a terrible mistake. Then she smiled, the radiant expression that had first captured his attention months ago. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I would very much like to be your wife. They decided on a small ceremony the following week, after the foundation celebration but before Evelyn's condition deteriorated further. Emma and Sophie were thrilled, immediately launching into plans for flowers and music and the perfect dress for their father's bride. As Grant drove home that night, the foundation charter on the seat beside him and a proposal accepted, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been a man without prospects, watching his daughters sacrifice their dreams for his failures. Now he was about to become the husband of a remarkable woman and the director of an organization that could change hundreds of lives. The irony wasn't lost on him, that just as he'd found everything he'd never known he wanted, time was running out to enjoy it. But Emma had been right. Love wasn't about duration, it was about depth. And what he felt for Evelyn, what they were building together both personally and professionally, had depth enough to last whatever lifetime they had remaining. The community center had never looked more beautiful. Emma and Sophie had arrived early to help with decorations, transforming the utilitarian space into something that felt both festive and dignified. Banners displaying the Cross Foundation logo hung alongside photos of program participants' children in the after-school program, families who had received housing assistance, patients who had been served by the mobile health clinic. Grant stood at the back of the room, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The same navy suit that had seen him through job interviews and funeral services now served as his outfit for what felt like the most important day of his professional life. In just an hour, the community would officially recognize him as the permanent director of their local foundation operations. You look nervous, Evelyn said, appearing beside him with the quiet grace she'd maintained despite her declining health. Terrified is more accurate, Grant admitted. What if I can't live up to their expectations? Evelyn smiled, her hand finding his with the familiarity of their newly acknowledged love. Grant, look around this room. Look at what you've already accomplished in just 4 months. Grant followed her gaze across the displays, showcasing their programs. The after-school initiative now served 137 children daily, providing not just homework help, but also nutritious snacks and a safe environment until parents finished work. The mobile health clinic had completed over 400 patient visits in rural areas that had been medically underserved for decades. The housing assistance program had helped 18 families achieve stable accommodation, with 6 of those families now in pathways toward home ownership. The numbers don't lie, Evelyn continued, But more importantly, the people don't lie. Listen to the conversations happening around you. Grant tuned into the buzz of voices filling the room as community members arrived. Maria Santos was describing to a neighbor how the job training program had helped her husband find full-time employment with benefits. Mrs. Patterson, the skeptical woman from his first community meeting, was telling someone about her grandson's improvement in school since joining the after-school program. Dave Martinez from the mall was explaining to a group how the foundation's partnership with local businesses had created 12 new part-time positions. "They're not talking about you as someone who was handed an opportunity," Evelyn said quietly. "They're talking about you as someone who earned their trust and delivered on his promises." The formal program began with remarks from the mayor, a thoughtful woman who had initially been cautious about the foundation's arrival, but had become one of Grant's strongest supporters. She spoke about the transformation she'd witnessed, not just in individual lives, but in the community's sense of hope and possibility. 6 months ago, our town council meetings were dominated by discussions of declined businesses closing, young people leaving, services being cut due to budget constraints, the mayor said. "Today, we're talking about expansion, new programs, returning residents, partnerships with surrounding communities who want to replicate our success." Grant listened from the side of the room, still amazed that his name was associated with this transformation. He thought about the security guard who had walked these same streets just months ago, invisible to most of the people now gathered to celebrate his work. When the mayor called him forward to speak, Grant felt the familiar flutter of nerves he'd experienced before every major presentation. But as he looked out at the assembled crowd, familiar faces from his years in the community, new faces of people whose lives had been touched by foundation, program's anxiety, settled into something steadier. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Grant began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "When I accepted this position, I thought I was just taking a job that would help me provide better for my daughters. I had no idea I was stepping into a role that would change not just my family's life, but my understanding of what community really means." He paused, looking directly at Maria Santos and her family, at Mrs. Patterson, at the teenagers from the after-school program who had come with their parents. "I want to tell you about something that happened last week. A mother came to our office because her 8-year-old son was struggling in school. Not because he wasn't smart, but because he was hungry. She worked 2 part-time jobs, but still couldn't afford groceries and rent in the same month. We connected her family with our food assistance program, her son with our after-school tutoring, and her with our job training initiative." Grant's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Yesterday, that same woman called to tell me her son had received his first A on a math test, and that she'd been offered a full-time position with health benefits. That's what this work is about, not charity, but investment. Not handouts, but hand-ups." The room erupted in applause, but Grant wasn't finished. "I stand before you tonight, not as someone who saved this community, but as someone who was saved by this community. Every program we've launched, every success we've celebrated, every family we've helped, it's all been possible because you welcomed me, trusted me, and worked alongside me." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the Community Recognition Award that would officially designate him as the Permanent Foundation Director. The plaque was simple bronze lettering on dark wood, but it represented more than Grant had ever imagined possible. "This award doesn't belong to me alone," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to every volunteer who has given their time, every family who has shared their story, every community member who has chosen hope over resignation." As Grant accepted the award from the mayor, the room rose in sustained applause. Emma and Sophie stood near the front, their faces radiant with pride. Evelyn watched from her chair, her breathing carefully controlled, but her smile brilliant with love and satisfaction. The recognition represented more than professional achievement. It marked Grant's complete transformation from a man who had felt invisible and ineffective to someone who had found his purpose and earned his community's respect. Evelyn's breathing crisis began during Grant's speech. She had been trying to suppress a cough for several minutes, not wanting to disrupt the ceremony, but suddenly her chest tightened with a severity that made her previous episodes seem mild. Her hand flew to her throat as she struggled to draw air into lungs that felt like they were closing against her. Emma noticed first. She had been watching Evelyn with the careful attention she'd learned to pay to people she loved, and she immediately saw the distress in the older woman's face. Without hesitation, Emma moved to Evelyn's side, kneeling beside her chair. "Dad," Emma called softly, but urgently enough that Grant immediately looked toward them. Grant saw Evelyn's pale face and labored breathing, and felt his EMT training kick in with the same instinctive response he'd had that first day at the mall. He quickly excused himself from the podium and moved through the crowd, which parted respectfully as people recognized the seriousness of the situation. "Let's get you some air," Grant said calmly, supporting Evelyn as they moved toward a quieter corner of the room. His voice carried the professional confidence that had helped her through her first crisis, though internally his heart was racing with fear. Sophie appeared with Evelyn's purse, having remembered the location of her rescue inhaler. But when Grant found the device, he could see immediately that Evelyn was beyond what the inhaler could address. Her lips were taking on a bluish tinge, and her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow and rapid. "We need to get you to the hospital," Grant said, his hand already reaching for his phone to call 911. "No," Evelyn managed to whisper, her hand closing over his wrist with surprising strength. "Not yet. Not here." Grant understood her reluctance to create a medical emergency in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration, but his training overrode social considerations. "Evelyn, this is serious. You need oxygen, probably IV medications." "Please," she said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that cut through his professional instincts. "Just get me to your car. We can go quietly." Against his better judgment, Grant agreed. With Emma and Sophie's help, he guided Evelyn through a side exit, while the mayor continued addressing the crowd, most of whom remained unaware of the crisis unfolding. The drive to the hospital was the longest 12 minutes of Grant's life, with Evelyn's breathing becoming increasingly labored, despite his attempts to keep her calm and focused. The emergency room staff knew Evelyn this wasn't her first visit, and they moved with practiced efficiency to get her stabilized. Grant found himself pacing the waiting room while Emma and Sophie sat quietly together, all three of them afraid to voice what they were thinking. Dr. Pattersona, coincidental sharing of names with the community member who had questioned Grant. Months earlier merged after what felt like hours, but had been only 90 minutes. "She's stable for now," Dr. Patterson said, settling into a chair across from Grant's family. "But I need to be honest with you about what we're looking at. Mrs. Cross's condition has progressed significantly since her last visit. The episode tonight was more severe than anything we've seen before." Grant felt the words like physical blows. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means we're looking at weeks rather than months. Her lung function has deteriorated to the point where episodes like tonight's will become more frequent and more severe. We can manage her comfort, but we can't reverse the damage." Emma reached for Grant's hand, and he was surprised to find that his daughter was offering him comfort rather than seeking it. "Can we see her?" Emma asked. "She's asking for you," Dr. Patterson said, "but please keep in mind that she's very tired, and talking is difficult for her right now." Evelyn looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, connected to machines that monitored her vital signs and provided supplemental oxygen. But her eyes were alert, and she smiled when she saw Grant and his daughters enter the room. "I'm sorry I ruined your celebration," she said, her voice hoarse but determined. "You didn't ruin anything," Grant said, moving to sit beside her bed. "The only thing that matters is that you're okay." "I'm not okay, Grant," Evelyn said with characteristic directness. "And we both know it. But I need to tell you something while I still can." She reached into the drawer of her bedside table and withdrew a sealed envelope, her movements careful but purposeful. The envelope was addressed simply to Grant in her elegant handwriting. "This is my final letter to you," Evelyn said, pressing the envelope into his hands. "Everything I want you to know about how much these months have meant to me, about how proud I am of the work you're doing, about how much I love you and your daughters." Grant felt tears threatening. "Evelyn, let me finish," she said gently. "I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, I don't want you to treat my memory like a burden. Don't let guilt or grief stop you from living fully, from loving again if that's what your heart wants, from continuing to grow and change." Sophie moved to the other side of the bed, taking Evelyn's free hand. "We promised to take care of Dad," she said with teenage solemnity, "and to make sure he doesn't get too stubborn about accepting help when he needs it." Evelyn laughed, a sound that quickly dissolved into coughing, but still carried genuine amusement. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear." As the evening wore on, with Evelyn drifting in and out of sleep and Grant maintaining his vigil beside her bed, he understood that this was their goodbye, not dramatic or sudden, but gentle and filled with love. The letter in his pocket felt heavy with promises he wasn't sure he was ready to make, but knew he would honor when the time came. The new foundation sign stood proudly in front of what had once been an abandoned department store, its bronze lettering gleaming in the autumn sunlight. The Evelyn Cross, Grant Fletcher Community Foundation. 6 months had passed since Evelyn's peaceful death. Surrounded by Grant and his daughters in the same hospital room where she had given him her final letter. 6 months of grief, growth, and the gradual understanding that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into something different, but no less powerful. Grant stood before the sign on this crisp October morning, remembering the dedication ceremony they had held the previous week. The entire community had turned out not just to honor Evelyn's memory, but to celebrate the continuation of work that had become the heartbeat of their town's renewal. Emma had spoken beautifully about the woman who had become like a grandmother to her and Sophie, while local families shared stories of how the Foundation's programs had changed their lives. "Dad, are you coming in?" Sophie called from the entrance, her voice strong and clear. The new treatment protocols that the Foundation's healthcare initiative had made possible had given her the best breathing she'd enjoyed in years. At 15, she was thriving in ways that would have been impossible without the stability and opportunities Evelyn's generosity had provided. "Just taking a moment," Grant replied, but he moved toward the building that had become the center of his professional life and personal purpose. Inside, the Foundation office buzzed with the activity that had become routine over the past year. 3 full-time staff members now supported Grant's work, along with a rotating team of volunteers from the community. The after-school program served over 200 children daily. The mobile health clinic had expanded to cover 4 rural counties, and the housing assistance program had helped 47 families achieve stable accommodation with pathways to home ownership. Grant's desk held the morning stack of correspondence grant applications, program reports, thank you letters from families who had been helped. But the document that captured his attention was a letter from the state university, confirming Emma's acceptance into their environmental science program with a full scholarship she had earned through her own merit and the Foundation's educational support. Emma would be leaving for college in 2 weeks, a milestone that filled Grant with pride and the particular sadness that comes with watching a child become an adult. She had grown into a remarkable young woman over the past year, balancing her senior year of high school with volunteer work at the Foundation and a part-time job she no longer needed but kept because she enjoyed the independence it provided. "Mr. Fletcher?" The voice belonged to James Rodriguez, a recent high school graduate who had been one of the first participants in the Foundation's job training program. James now worked full-time as an administrative assistant, saving money for college while gaining professional experience. "What can I do for you, James?" "There's a family here to see you, the Williamses. They don't have an appointment, but they said it was important." Grant nodded, recognizing the name from their housing assistance program. Tom Williams had lost his factory job 8 months ago, and the Foundation had helped his family avoid eviction while he retrained for work in the growing renewable energy sector. The Williamses sat in the reception area, Tom, his wife Sarah, and their 2 young children. Tom stood when he saw Grant approaching, his face showing a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Mr. Fletcher, I hope you don't mind us stopping by without calling, Tom said, shaking Grant's hand. But I wanted to tell you in person, I got the job. The position with the wind energy company, full-time with benefits, and they want me to start Monday. Grant felt the familiar warmth that came with witnessing the moment when someone's life took a positive turn. Tom, that's fantastic news. How do you feel about the work? Like I'm finally doing something that matters, Tom said. Something that's building toward the future, instead of just trying to hold on to the past. And Mr. Fletcher, we wanted you to know that we're staying in town. Sarah was worried we might have to move for me to find decent work, but now our kids can grow up here, in a community that actually cares about families like ours. After the Williamses left, Grant found himself thinking about the ripple effects of the work they were doing. Tom's story would be shared with neighbors and friends, demonstrating that opportunity and second chances were possible in their town. His children would grow up with a different understanding of what was possible in their community. The businesses that employed foundation program graduates would see the value of investing in local training and development. Emma appeared in his office doorway, holding a coffee cup and wearing the thoughtful expression that usually meant she had something important to discuss. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Emma settled into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where Evelyn had first explained the Foundation's mission almost a year ago. Do you think Mom would have approved of everything that's happened? Your work here, your relationship with Evelyn, the way our lives changed? Grant considered the question, though he'd asked it of himself many times over the past months. I think your mother would have been amazed by what you and Sophie have accomplished. I think she would have been proud that I found work that uses the best parts of who I am, and I think she would have been grateful that Evelyn brought love back into my life, even if it was only for a short time. And now I try to honor both of their memories by living the kind of life they would want for me. Work that matters, relationships that are real, and making sure that you and Sophie have every opportunity to become the amazing women you're already becoming. Emma smiled, the expression so reminiscent of her mother that Grant felt his heart clench with bittersweet recognition. Evelyn was right, you know, in that letter she left for us. She said that the best way to honor people we love is to keep growing, keep helping others, keep opening our hearts to new possibilities. Grant looked around his office, at the photos of program participants, at the charts showing measurable improvements in community health and economic stability, at the letter from Emma's college that represented dreams achieved through hard work and opportunity. Evelyn's influence was visible everywhere, woven into the fabric of their daily lives and their future possibilities. She was right about a lot of things, Grant said, including her belief that one moment of compassion can change everything. As the afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, Grant Fletcher, former security guard, EMT-trained community helper, foundation director, and briefly but deeply beloved husband, to turn to the work that had become his calling. Outside, the town continued its gradual renewal, strengthened by programs built on the foundation of one woman's generosity and one man's willingness to believe he deserved a second chance at purpose and love.